Alright, you read the title, and yes, I'm trying to flip enough gaming computers until I can put a down payment on a house. What's the goal? At least $15,000, keyword being at least. Now, sad to say, this is actually the final episode. For season 2 at least. I do have a feeling that sometime this year in 2025, we will complete this series and reach our goal. We have made a good amount of progress since the start. On episode 1, we only had $1,000 towards our down payment. And now after the most recent episode, we raked in a total of 6 sales and all of the computers were around the same spec range and we profited $573. Our down payment fund is looking a little better now. Now, if you're wondering how have you only saved up this much, go watch the final episode in season 1 and you'll get your answer. Now in today's episode, we rake in a really good amount of profit as you've seen from the thumbnail. I also get some pretty good deals on eBay and I finally try to flip a gaming computer with an Intel Xeon CPU. Yeah, a lot happens in this episode. Before we get further into the video, I want to thank our sponsor, Super CDK. Now, if you're flipping computers, you should probably activate Windows, and sometimes you will get lucky and it'll already be activated, but in the off chance it's not, I always buy from Super CDK. I've been buying keys from them for nearly 3 years and have never had any issue. You can visit them down below and be sure to use the discount code SPLA. You can get Windows 10 keys for as low as $15 or Windows 11 keys for as low as $22. The discount code also works on any other Microsoft products they may have. And once you get the key, activating it is super easy. You just copy and paste it into your window activation settings, click activate, and bam, you save some money and activated Windows. Thank you Super CDK for sponsoring this video. Be sure to check them out with the links below. We're starting today's episode on December 18th. This month has been pretty good to me, other than right now I do have a little bit of a cold, but we're working through it. Anyways, behind me is a computer that sold just a few hours ago. I didn't get it shipped off for same day shipping, I was a little busy, but right now I am getting it stress tested so that I can pack it up tonight and get it shipped first thing tomorrow morning. Now the computer, it's not anything special, it's a simple build that I kind of repeat a lot. It has a Ryzen 5 2600, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 512 gigabyte SSD, and the graphics card is a GTX 1070. But the most important thing is that it sold and the profit is honestly pretty good. Off the top of my head, I want to say it's around $130 to $150, but the exact profit is up on screen. Now, what if I've told you this is my 10th sale this month? Yeah, I have 9 other computers to tell you about. A lot more profit is coming. But first, we need to make sure this one's running perfectly and get it packed up and shipped off. Sorry if I look a little rough. I just woke up about 30 minutes ago. It is 6:58 a.m. You're not gonna believe it, and honestly, I don't believe it, but in the past maybe 8 hours, I've sold 3 computers. The 2 that you've seen me turn on, I'm about to test them right now for an hour. Final testing, you know, make sure everything is running perfectly before I do pack it up. And then after one of these completes and I pack them both up, we have another one to test. Let me tell you about the specs, price breakdown, and profit on this one. So this computer, I built it in a separate video. It has a Ryzen 5 2600, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it came in like an A320 motherboard combo from AliExpress. And then for the graphics card, it's a GTX 1070 from EVGA, has a 1TB SSD, Corsair 650 watt power supply, and the case is the Dark Flash C275P, which I also bought from AliExpress. Ladies and gentlemen, this one gave us another fat profit of $200. And now let me tell you the price breakdown, specs, and profit of this one. So this computer is another Ryzen 5 system, but it's a Ryzen 5 3600 with another 16 gigabytes of RAM, another 1TB SSD, but the graphics card is an EVGA RTX 3060 with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. And I also added a PCI Wi-Fi and Bluetooth card, so this one is pretty loaded out actually. It has a full ATX motherboard, tons of room for expansion, and then Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. The profit on this one is pretty good. Not as fat as this one, but still around $150 after we paid Jawa. They take their little piece of the pie, but we're still left with a good amount. As you see, that notification says 3 hours ago. So literally as I woke up, I checked my phone and I had another cell. Here is computer cell number 3. This computer is another Ryzen 5 3600, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 1 terabyte SSD, 650 watt power supply, and the graphics card is an RTX 3060 that I custom spray painted white. My build cost for this computer is $404.60, which gives us a profit close to $200 once again. But I kind of have some bad news. Well, not really. So I have those first 2 computers packed up, but these were my last 2 boxes, so I have to make a quick run to Home Depot so I can pack up that 3rd one right there. Making my way downtown in the whip. I'm about to ship 3 computers. I don't know why that song has been in my head, but it just like keeps replaying. Anyways, we're finally making it to the post office at about 10:20. The day started at about 6:30. It's been a pretty good morning, pretty busy morning, but you know, that's what you gotta live for, baby. No one wants to stay in bed and do nothing all day. I mean, definitely sometimes, don't get me wrong. Now, 2 of these computers that sold, they're UPS labels. UPS store here is pretty quick. The other one is a USPS. I hate going to the post office. They take all day. So yeah, I'll probably see you guys next year. Psych, you get to see me right now. It is the next day. It is actually the morning of Christmas Eve. The next few days I'm gonna be taking off, just relaxing, chilling with the family. So today I figured I might as well do a little bit of work. I want to build a computer and at least start to test it out. I won't list it for sale for the next few days because I don't want it to sell. I don't want to deal with it. But in like 4 days, it'll be ready to be listed for sale. We're going to start this computer build with this bag right here. So this is a CPU, motherboard, and RAM combo that I bought probably almost 6 months ago now. And it's just been sitting in my inventory, so it's finally time to use it. Let's go and get this GPU installed so we can check for a post. We're also going to need some power, motherboard power, CPU power, and finally GPU power. All right, moment of truth. Okay, all the fans are spinning. That's a good sign. Still just spinning. Come on. And there's no debug lights on this motherboard. The only light is just right here. First troubleshooting step I'm doing is just resetting the CMOS. Round 2. Now to try a different graphics card. Oh yeah, baby, we got a post. But that sucks because that most likely means this graphics card is faulty. This isn't the first time it's given me no signal on a motherboard, but we'll save this for another time. Now for the specs of this motherboard combo. The motherboard itself is a Gigabyte AB350. It's kind of old, but it's still on the AM4 platform. For the RAM, it is 16 gigabytes of DDR4. It's crucial. It's only clocked at 2400 megahertz, but the CPU is a first gen Ryzen 5 1600. So this slower RAM isn't gonna matter all too much. Yeah, just as I thought. There's like no thermal paste. And it's like so old, it's just flaking. Little scrubby dub. Can't forget the cooler.
Oh yeah.
We can't forget the storage. I'm installing a budget 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. Now for the case, I'm using one from RaidMax. It's the V300 and it's the same exact case that you saw earlier from that Ryzen 5 3600 and RTX 3060 build. To power this computer, I'm using this Thermaltake Smart 650 watt 80 plus bronze unit, and it has all black cables. And now for the graphics card going into this build, it is this 3-fan Asus Strix GTX 1060, which is rocking 6 gigabytes of VRAM. Okay, the build is basically done, and as I said, the power supply has all black cables, so I'm just using that for the 24 pin and the CPU power. But for the graphics card, the PCIe power, I want to use a cable extension. I'm just using a black one, and the reason being, it'll look way better. And as you can see, I have a lot of spares. This build actually turned out looking pretty good. I love the red or the RGB on that graphics card. I'm pretty sure you can set it to any color as well, but wow, Looks pretty damn good right now. I'm gonna get this thing fully stress tested, fully benchmarked, then I'll come back in a few days after the holidays and we'll get it listed for sale. Well, my plan didn't work out. The PC ended up failing the stress test, but that's perfect for our hashtag PFQ. It just stands for PC flipping question, and for every computer build in this series, I choose a random question from the comments to answer with it, so feel free to leave one for the next episode. Today's question is from Sambria1949, and their question was just about benchmarks, how I do it, and if you should just look up benchmarks on YouTube and call it good. No, you should actually benchmark the computer to ensure it can actually play games and doesn't have any issues with the drivers or anything else like that. But before I benchmark the computer, I like to stress test it first to see if it has any issues like you've seen with this computer right here. I like to run FurMark and OCCT for the GPU and Prime 95 for the CPU. I run these tests for at least an hour before I even test the games, and if there's errors during this, then I don't waste my time with the games. But when I do test the games, the free ones work great. You don't have to spend money and buy every new game. The free ones like Fortnite, Valorant, and Apex all work great because they're popular and they're free. And to get the actual FPS numbers for your benchmarks, I use the free software MSI Afterburner. That's how I get the stats in the left corner, like the temperature for the CPU and the GPU and the average FPS and 1% low. Now, unfortunately, since this computer has some issues, I wasn't able to get it listed for sale, but I have something really weird to share. So after the first set of stress tests where it had like 44 errors, I decided to rerun it again for another hour, and it had 0 errors. So then I reran the VRAM test, kept all the other tests running, let it run back to back for another hour, and it still had 0 errors. And to add to that, the computer plays games with no issues. I was able to test Fortnite, I also tested Call of Duty Black Ops 6, and I ended the testing with Apex Legends. At this point, I don't even know what's wrong with the PC or if nothing's wrong with the computer. Maybe it was like a weird bug, I'm not sure what's going on. I want to get this thing listed for sale, but I want to make sure it doesn't have any problems, so I want your feedback first. Go ahead and leave a comment down below if you've ever seen what you've seen in the video where it was testing and it said it had 44 VRAM errors, but then it's perfectly fine after, like, what? Moving on from this weird PC, if you remember towards the beginning of the video, I said a lot more profit is coming. Let's get into it. The sales started back on December 1st. This computer was rocking a Ryzen 5 3600, 16 gigabytes of DDR4, 1 terabyte SSD, and the graphics card was an RTX 3060 Ti. My total cost was $420.63, and we ended up profiting $196.85. The next sale happened on December 2nd. This system was running a Ryzen 5 2600X, 16 gigabytes of RAM, another 1 terabyte M.2, and the GPU was a very nice looking GTX 1080 Ti from EVGA. This ran my wallet $419.49, and we profited $118.11. Looking back on this sale, I could have priced it a little higher because it sold the first day I listed it, but oh well, it already happened. Now our next sale didn't happen until 3 days later on December 5th, but we actually sold 2 computers that day, and they were identical in specs. They both had Ryzen 5 2600, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 512 gigabyte M.2 SSD, and the graphics cards were GTX 1660 Supers. One of them was an Asus TUF model, and that system cost me $296.74 and made us a sweet profit of $174.45. The other 1660 Super was an MSI Gaming X model with RGB, and that computer cost me $307.10 and profited us $164.09. And the MVP of those 2 computers has to go to the Ryzen 5 2600s, which I bought on an AliExpress deal for just $21.39 each. After that, 5 days passed with no sales, but then we finally sold another one. Of course, it was another Ryzen 5 2600 build, except it was rocking a GTX 1060 6GB version. It was a little more of a budget build, and it cost me $272.42 and left me with a profit of $133.45. Then the next day after, we sold another computer. It cost me $327.99 and it was rocking a Ryzen 5 2600 and another GTX 1660. This build ended up making us $146 $43.20 in profit. I followed that up with another sale the very next day. As usual, I had a Ryzen 5 CPU, the 3600 to be exact, and it was another GTX 1080 Ti build. It cost me a total of $441.33, and I ended up making a profit of $124.09. The day after that was December 13th, and I ended up selling 2 more computers in the same day. The first sale was a completely different build compared to all my other sales. It has an Intel i7 6700, and I paired that with an RX 590. I spent $255.70 and ended up making $116.76. The second sale of the day was another Intel system, and it cost me $302.16. The CPU is the Intel i5 9400F, and I paired that with another one of those EVGA GTX 1080 Ti's, and this computer ended up profiting us $236.34. Shout out to Shane for the free motherboard combo. You're the real MVP of this sale. Anyways, since I just shared some of my recent sales with you, go and drop a comment down below, share one of your recent flips that you successfully sold, and let me know how much it cost you and what your exact profit was. And if you haven't sold any computers, go and leave a comment anyways. Now, during all those sales, I've still had a good amount of inventory coming in from eBay because that's how I make money. So let's go over a few of my favorite deals. The first deal is a Zotac 2-fan graphics card, but as you can see, it isn't in the best condition. So how is this a deal? Well, for starters, I only paid $29.66, and it is a GTX 1070. And yes, it still works. I had it in my test computer and was testing the VRAM and how well it did under load. It got hot pretty quickly, but I pretty much expected that, you know, considering the condition. The description from the seller was pretty bland, but they mentioned that it was missing the screws to attach the fan bracket. That is true, but also the screw holes on the fan bracket were broken, so even if I had the screws, it wouldn't hold it in place, and the GPU itself was overall pretty dirty. But since it was basically taken apart, I finished doing that, cleaned it up, and I also decided to spray paint the fan shroud white. Now here's the new and fresh GTX 1070 for under $30. You might be wondering how I attach the fans back. Zip ties, my friend, zip ties. It's not the best solution, but it works, and when I sell it in a computer, I will note everything in the description so the buyer is fully aware of what they are buying. For this next graphics card deal, I bought 5 GTX 1060s. Now this deal didn't go how I expected because I thought I was buying the 6GB version of the 1060, but it turned out they were all the 3GB version. That was honestly super unfortunate when I found out, but I just reached out to the seller and was giving him the benefit of the doubt. It turns out he just listed them pretty quickly using a similar model, but he didn't notice that it classified them as a 6GB model. He offered either a partial refund or a return. I just straight up told him that I wouldn't have bought them if I knew they were the 3GB version, and I told him my price if I were to keep them all. He was okay with that, and he issued me a pretty nice refund, which brought the total down to $89.42, which is just $17.88 each. I would say that is a pretty good deal. Now it still sucks I didn't get the 6GB version, but in the end it all worked out. Now this next deal is another graphics card from Zotac, but luckily the fans and everything is intact, unlike that 1070. This is a twin fan GTX 1660, and I only paid $59.38. I will buy that deal any day of the week. That's a super great price for a really nice budget GPU. And if you paid attention to those sales from earlier, the 1660 builds sell pretty well. And great news, this card runs perfectly. I ran Firmark and I tested the VRAM for an hour and it had 0 issues and the temps were great. To switch up the deals, I want to show you a CPU deal and I'll be using this one later in the video. I bought 5 Intel Xeons. They're the Xeon E5 2680 V3 and I paid $4.34 each. That's not the cheapest I've seen, but it's a decent price for this CPU. I'll be pairing those CPUs with this RAM deal that I bought. It's Samsung DDR4 ECC RAM, and I bought 4 separate 16GB sticks, and it came to $10.87 each. Okay, back to more graphics cards. This deal right here is a GTX 1660 Ti. I know it's from a pre-built, and I'm pretty sure it's from HP, and unfortunately it's only a 1-fan model. But on the bright side, I only paid $57.62. As you can see, the title says it's a GTX 1070 Ti, but I knew it wasn't, and the seller confirmed that I was right about my assumption. And I also decided to spray paint this one as well. These types of cooler designs are relatively easy to paint, and I think it turned out pretty good. Now this next deal is my most recent graphics card purchase, and I bought it on December 22nd. I ended up scoring this 3-fan RTX 3060 with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. I kind of thought I was going to get scammed because the account was brand new, made in December 2024, but I bit the bullet and luckily it is working perfectly. It had zero issues with the VRAM, and thanks to the 3 fans, this thing kept a really solid temperature. I paid a total of $160.13, which isn't a crazy deal by any means, but it's a deal nonetheless. Alrighty, it is time to use one of those Xeons and get a build put together. I've messed with a few Xeons in the past, like in 2020 and in 2021, but for the life of me, I can't remember if I actually sold them in a gaming PC. I'm pretty sure I swapped them out for like an Intel i7. I'm using this Machinist X99 motherboard from AliExpress. This board looks pretty decent, has 4 RAM slots, 1 M.2 slot, and 6 USB ports, but unfortunately it doesn't support USB 3. It has a header for it, but it's only USB 2 speeds. Yeah, I really messed up when purchasing this motherboard, and I actually bought 9 other of the same board, but luckily my return request was accepted on AliExpress, so I'll get my money back, and maybe in the future I'll buy some that at least support USB 3. The Xeon I'm using, like I mentioned earlier, it is a Xeon E5 2680 V3. It has 12 cores, 24 threads, and a base frequency of 2.5 gigahertz. Pretty bad clock speeds, but that's literally all Xeon CPUs. The RAM is that Samsung ECC RAM, and I filled up the NVMe slot with a Samsung 512GB M.2 SSD, which I bought for $26.08 on good old eBay. For the cooler, I'm using an AliExpress special, the AIGO Ice 400 SE, which I spray painted the top part white, and I replaced the fan for an addressable RGB one from Thermalright. And to finish off this build with the graphics card, I'm installing one of those 5 GTX 1060 3GB versions. And I also decided to add a white cable since I have a ton of extras, as you've seen earlier. Now what if I told you this build didn't go how I expected, like at all? I started running my usual stress test and the Xeon got hot pretty quickly, like super hot. I then thought it was maybe a bad CPU, so I quickly swapped it for another Xeon E5, and yeah, this thing was still really toasty. I let it run for an hour and it did that with no issues other than the temps, but also on our graphics card, the temperature wasn't the greatest either. And keep in mind, I did apply fresh thermal paste to that GTX 1060. I then decided to see how it performs in games, so I loaded into Fortnite and we were averaging above 100 FPS, but that's not important. If you look at the top left corner, we can see the temperatures. Our little GTX 1060 is still running really hot, basically stuck at 82 degrees. But the Xeon CPU is at a much cooler temperature, but it's also only being utilized about 50%. I then kind of thought it was the case, so I wasted time taking it out of the case and doing some tests on an open air test bench. The reason I said I wasted time is because it gave me the same result. The CPU is just running super hot under 100% full load. I decided to rebuild it, but instead of using that GTX 1060, I wanted to swap it out for the Zotac GTX 1660 that we unboxed earlier. Reason being, in games and in stress tests, that 1060 just runs way too hot, so I'm deciding not to use it, and I'm actually going to be selling all 5 of those GTX 1060s because like I told the eBay seller, I wouldn't have bought them anyways. I only want to use GPUs with at least 6 gigabytes of VRAM. After rebuilding it, I hopped back into games to finish off these benchmarks. In Fortnite, I played at 1080p with DirectX 12 and I used Pro settings. This time around, the GPU temp is way better and so is our average FPS. We were averaging 133 FPS with 1% low of 48. For Call of Duty Black Ops 6, I ran the in-game benchmark at 1080p and I set the settings to normal/low and I turned on AMD FSR 3 frame generation. I was quite surprised with the results. We averaged 110 FPS with a 1% low of 89. Here is the completed build. My total cost came to $214.61, and in my opinion, that is pretty damn good, especially for the performance that this computer dishes out. Now yes, it has a temperature problem with the CPU when it is under 100% full load, but in games it is perfectly, and I have a feeling whoever buys this budget PC is just going to be using it for gaming. But since this was a new PC build, we have another hashtag PFQ. This question is from Jumbo Shrimp, and he's asking if you can just start PC flipping with no money. Yes, but why would you want to try to make money without spending money? You're just delaying your success by being scared to spend money. Now, if you don't have any money, that's a different story. So I guess you can try and wait for someone to give away their free PC, but good luck. Let's go. That Xeon PC already sold. And then I'm using the motherboard box that came with that X99 board, and I'm throwing all the accessories in there. Of course, the power cord, USB Wi-Fi dongle, and then the RGB remote. Well, I'll be honest, I didn't expect it to sell that quickly. I actually have it packaged up right here and I'm about to go ship it off. And it actually sold on January 1st, so we're starting the year off with a bang. The profit's up on screen if you're curious, and I'm actually considering doing a little more of these Xeon builds, maybe in the future. I'm going to end the video here, but before I go, I want to give a huge thank you to you. Yes, you watching right now. Especially if you watch my videos all the way until the end, you're the reason I still make them. As a way to kind of show my appreciation, here's a $25 Amazon gift card, and here's another one. And bam, here's 2 more. I wish I could do more, but sadly I'm not rich. Now, if you're one of the few people that were able to redeem those codes, please let me know in the comments. It would be really cool to see who got them and give you a thank you. Anyways, if you enjoyed this episode, smash that like button, subscribe if you loved it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.